And this is Meditations on the Tarot. This is the Hermit, letter 9. Alice.
Okay, then. So now we're really getting into the heart of the Meditations on the Tarot book, and it's becoming more dense and more dark. So it's appropriate that the Hermit is here because we need his lamp. It is dense stuff, and like I said, all of these arcana, they build on each other. So you need to keep the axioms that you learned earlier kind of in your head, in your mind, if you can, or in your heart, which you have to trust that your heart is picking up this information. Even if your head is a little behind, it's okay. Let me plunge into this figure. This is one of my favorite cards. In spite of its difficulty, this one really speaks to me. The Hermit is a solitary figure, and he's wearing a red robe and a blue mantle. And he has a lantern alternating yellow and red, and he has a staff. There is a terrain below him, which seems to be a climb off into darkness. He's surrounded by darkness. I also noticed that he's bareheaded with a hood behind him. There's a hood of the mantle is down behind him. Now, this is not brought up by Tomberg in any way, his bareheadedness, but I think it's significant somehow. So I'm going to throw that out there because I think that that would require further meditation on this card. It's an invitation. So we're entering what's called the narrow gate here. And this symbolizes the narrow gate. The Hermit, I'm going to just wrap it up to the very end. The Hermit ends up also being called the card of prudence. So I do like to give you like the concept right away because keep that in mind. The Hermit represents prudence, which he tells us what that's about. So he is a spiritual father. There's all sorts of names for this: guru, mage, sadik. There's all sorts of names for a spiritual father, someone that we look up to guide us as a spiritual guide. So this represents the hard way to the divine. Therefore, it's a rugged terrain. As you see the rugged terrain and the dark and perilous path. This is what it's visually showing. The light is shining into the darkness. It's separating the Hermit from the collective illusions. Okay, he is separating himself from the collective illusions. He's only got this lamp. That's kind of my summation there. So he's on 3 feet. He has his 2 feet on the ground. Very practical, but he's touching the ground with his staff. That represents a real serious groundedness and experience, firsthand experience and grounded experience. This is not just any kind of experience it's not just intellectual theorizing. There is a creation of light, silence, and certainty around the Hermit. There's a triple concordance, which to me describes the essence of gnosis, which is clarity, represented by the lamp, the harmony of the whole, which is represented by the all-embracing mantle, and the immediate experience represented by the touch with the staff. Keep in mind, there's the bareheaded element. I think that's important. I'm not sure how yet, haven't figured it out. But his head is bare. He is exposed to the heavens. The crown of the head is exposed to the heavens. I think that's important. The Hermeticism is further defined as the synthesis of 3 antinomies or methods of knowledge. Now, this gets into the really super arcane. This is really difficult stuff, and I'm going to gloss over it as quickly as possible because we can go in where there's no clarity. If you need to explore this more deeply, we can do that. But the 3 antinomies are, and this is where a background in philosophy helps, or theology. This is getting into heavy philosophy and theology. So mostly philosophical logic. So the 3 antinomies are the antinomy of idealism and realism, which I would call a priori, idealism being a priori knowledge, realism being the thing in itself. Analogy, the second antinomy is realism and nominalism, in which he explores analogy. The third is faith and empirical science, and experience. Experience is involved in that. So the work at hand is to resolve these three antinomies, which are presented as polarities or binaries, and which are inviting us to create a synthesis. They're inviting us to take the extraordinary. It's an extraordinary step, to step beyond up and into the darkness to create a synthesis. Walking into the darkness or the light to create a synthesis, and that comes later. But the synthesis is the most important thing for the Hermeticist, because the Hermeticist does not just accept a worldview that is idealistic or just realistic or just one of faith or just one of empirical science, because that would narrow his field. And the Hermeticist field must stay practical and wide open at all times. We know this. Staying open and dealing with the synthesis of what seem to be paradoxes. And that becomes more and more apparent as we go along. The number is 9. So he's got this nice tidy, the three antinomies, which 3 times 3 is 9. The three antinomies break down into a synthesis of these 3 points, the binaries and the synthesis point. So it's very clever the way he can map this out with threes. And I like that. Again, this helps us wrap our head around the structures. I would love to see Tomberg's, I would love to have seen Tomberg's, what would you say, his outlines, his notes for this. I would love to see that. So there's, so then on the idealism spectrum, we have philosophers, thinkers like Plato, Hegel, and on the realism side, we have thinkers like Socrates and Spencer. Idealism represents what we call the subjective point of view of coherence, and it tends to fall into pan-intellectual monism. And realism falls into the camp of objective reality, so-called reality, objective reality, which depends on correspondence and is dualistic by its very nature. So then he goes into God and the Word and what emanates from the Word. And his premise, his theory that he wants to prove is that all of reality must be based on the reality which emanates from the Word. The light of thought, the intellect, and the world of reality, the thing itself, it must radiate from what he calls the Word. So we're going to explore that. The antinomies are, and I really don't touch on these very lightly because there's so much to cover here. Idealism and realism. Idealistic, realistic. The synthesis is logoistic, which means of the logos, of the Word of God. So we have objective manifestation and subjective manifestation, the world of prototypes. And the subjective manifestation is the prototype of human intelligence. Okay, so there's the objective prototype is the world of prototypes in the phenomenal world. Let me know if I'm making you feel muddled. Just raise your hand if I'm going to make things muddy. So the light that shines in the darkness and the darkness receiveth it not, which is a quote from John. We know that. And if you contemplate just that one sentence from John, it's very packed. And this is what Tomberg is trying to get to. Illusions. And he goes on about illusions, darkness, the evolutionary world of the serpent. Now he pits the evolutionary world of which is created by the serpent on the horizontal plane, as opposed to the world created by the Word. That's the world, capital W, versus the world, small w, the world of the serpent. Okay, these are things you have to accept as givens. So we have cosmic intelligence versus human intellect. Okay, so there's, again, these things we have to resolve. The hermit staff represents correspondence in the world of empirical science. We feel our way with the staff. We feel our way in the phenomenal world. The hermit mantle represents coherence, the coherence of idealistic thought, ideation. And the hermit lamp represents the light of the word, which is the fuel for the endeavor of the human intellect. We need the lamp, we need the light of the word. Again, that gets back to the light of revelation. Okay, that's antinomy 1. Antinomy 2 is the realism and nominalism. This is a really gnarly one, people. And this gets to the point where when I was a philosophy student, we got into what's called phenomenology. And in philosophy, they call nominalism phenomenology, which I thought was a real mind effer, okay? And I really, really hated the phenomenologists, okay, such as Husserl and Heidegger. And what made it worse was that they were all Germans with this line of thought, and their translations were abominable. You couldn't understand what the heck they were talking about. And I realized later it didn't matter what they were talking about, because what they were talking about was really hogwash, because they went way into nominalism. And that was where they decided to hang their entire philosophical careers. Not Heidegger, excuse me. I take Heidegger out of that. Husserl, I put into that camp. So then you've got realism and nominalism. And then there's a third foot there, which is conceptualism, which is where he puts Immanuel Kant actually as a conceptualist. So this gets really heady. I don't want to go into this deeply. We can go into this later. But it goes into a priori knowledge, universals, universale ante rem, the idea, which is the idea before the object. And then there's the universal in re, which is immanence in the thingness itself. So universal ante rem would be the idea of a pyramid, right? A priori knowledge. You have the Platonic ideas fall here, ideals fall here. Let's say you have the idea of a pyramid. He used horses. I say pyramid. I like the idea of this abstract object. In universale in re, you are thinking of the immanence of pyramidness. And that's the immanence of the pyramid in pyramid itself. Then you have the universale post rem, which is after the object, which is abstraction, which is the concept of the pyramid, which is desired from the common features of all the pyramids to make a concept of a pyramid. You understand? So, so there you go. There's that. The problem of creation versus Genesis. The idea of the divine plan. Is there a divine plan, which is anterior to the creation of the world? Or is the creation a realization it's a thing, it's a manifestation, which then creates, which moves towards creation, divine. It's a genesis. The idea of generating life out of real substance and matter of the world. Okay, I think you know what I'm trying to say. So you have the forces of Genesis and the forces of evolution, trial and error, which is the Darwinian map of that the force is immanent in the something in the substance of beings, and the world matter just gropes its way by trial and error. We talked about this last time, the groping trial, the trial and error way of evolution, which basically excludes the idea of a plan altogether. Okay, and then you have the Adam Cadman, who represents the prototype of the created universe. The word created, the logos, would be the prototype of man. This is where you've got the divine blueprint, the divine plan. And so Adam Cadman is the prototype of humanity, which is created, which emanates from the word, because God spoke the word in Genesis and man was created. Okay, there's that model, which implies that there is a divine plan behind it all. So these two worldviews are kind of seemingly in our world pitted against each other often, creationism and evolutionism are often presented as an antinomy that we are faced with constantly in our world. So so let me just go on and run ahead here to nominalism is basically that the particular incidence of reality is more real than an abstraction, than a generality. Realism can fall into what's called collectivism, and realism as a worldview can fall into collectivism, which can become fascism. Okay, that the individual man is subsumed in importance to the greater humanity. Okay, the greater humanity is the abstraction of the human, and so realism tends to fall into collectivism. Nominalism tends to fall into the opposite camp of radical individuality. Okay, and so nominalism tends to make us blind to the principles of goodness, beauty, and truth, because everything becomes radically subjective. And so without objective reality, we cannot aspire to anything that's universal. I think we see nominalism at play in our world now. Well, we certainly see fascism, but we also see nominalism, which is where there's like 20 genders, right? That's a perfect example of nominalism, which it caters to an endlessly catering individuality, which gets more and more narrow, more and more particular, more and more individual, farther and farther away from a universal principle, such as the idea of gender being a binary. Okay, so just to make my point, not whether or not, what's your opinion on these things doesn't matter. I'm just trying to present where I see these in the world, where I see these things coming up. So the opposite of science would be nominalism, because it gives rise to sects and subjective tastes and this splintering of reality, and splintering reality into a multitude of forms and genders, what have you. Whatever it is, just a multitudinous, rather chaotic trial of groping, a groping trial that encourages the groping trial, okay, into chaos. So realism, we have to go back to realism, which is what we're trying to get at is the combination of science and religion. How to combine science and religion. So you might say there you've got creationism and evolutionary theory. So one is considered objective and one is transsubjective. So this goes on and on. Let me just cut to the chase. But he gets back to nominalism. They're both important. Nominalism is important because we do love in the particular, and we call our loves by name. So individualism is very, very important. So you can't toss out nominalism. And realism is what gives us the objective, gives us a more objective truth. So we need to stay in guidance with, he brings up the incarnation again. The incarnation being the particular incarnation of the universal logos. So Jesus himself is a solving of the problem of this antinomy. Okay, Jesus's incarnation itself. And then he goes on and gives another example, which is the staff of Moses. And we'll get to that. There's the alchemy of baptism, which represents the union of realism and nominalism, the head and the heart union. This is very, very important. The word became flesh, and there is a union of the head and the heart being the very heart of the flesh and of all of our cardial living. Okay, so Christian Hermeticism itself can only be knowledge of the universal, which is revealed in the particular. That's a wonderful, if you need a couple of like short sound bites of what Christian Hermeticism is, that's a good one. That's on page 208. Christian Hermeticism itself can only be knowledge of the universal, which is revealed in the particular. So now he talks about laws, that laws are immanent in beings, and logic is immanent in thought. So laws are immanent. They are part and parcel of the fabric of beingness, and logic is part and parcel of the world of thought. Okay, so you can structurally change beings. They're evolving from life, from one law of life to another law of life. Therefore, that's where you can talk about evolution. And this is where Teilhard de Chardin comes in with his concepts of the evolving from life to life, from law of life to law of life. So hence a law like an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, the survival of the fittest, the law of the struggle for existence is replaced in our evolutionary model with cooperation for existence, love of one's neighbor as oneself, forgiveness as the model of the new law, and the law of the heart, which is what Jesus introduced to us. Therefore, and this is where Teilhard de Chardin goes, I think, which is that the Darwinian model is very limited if you just look at it as survival of the fittest. But indeed, the idea that there's a window into a new law, which is the cooperation for existence, not merely survival of the fittest, but that there's a cooperative effort amongst all beings towards an evolutionary and progressive existence. This is the idea of progress. This is the idea that there's a progressive evolution. So laws succeed each other. They are mutable. First, they're in consciousness. A law forms itself in consciousness, and then it filters down into our desires and inclinations, and then it becomes an organic structure of the things and beings of the world. Is this making sense, people, or am I like? I hope you're still with me, because this is so much stuff. So things like the law of the Sabbath, for instance, the Sabbath is made for man, is not man for the Sabbath. This is what Jesus came to teach, because the law of Moses said that the Sabbath was made for man. That's how man understood it. And so the Philistines would enforce the laws of the Sabbath very rigidly. And Jesus came in and started doing what they call work on the Sabbath, which was spiritual work, healing work, preaching and teaching. And he was doing the work on the Sabbath. So he came out and said, the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath. Therefore, the law conforms to the Son of Man, not the other way around. We do not conform to the laws. The laws must change when our consciousness changes. And I think that's an important point. So then he goes into what I would call the great chain of being, the world of spiritual beings being the basis of the reality of the laws, principles, and ideas. So you have principalities, you have, the powers, right? The principalities, the cherubim, the seraphim, they actually have names, which sound like the names of laws. The law of gravity is probably the name of an angel. I don't know which one, but there you have it. That's where that's going. There's a structural kinship, which are called common archetypes, arising from our common origins. And so Adam Kadmon is a prototype synthesis of the archetype of man. Okay. So realism has these universals, which are revealed in archetypes. Okay. So that's pretty much a summation of antimony number 2. Oh my gosh. Okay. And I know I missed a lot. Antimony number 3 is faith and empirical science. So faith and empirical science. What is the synthesis there? We have religion, basically, and science. This is a big subject. So he breaks down belief into 3 types of belief. Three, not 4. 3. There's belief faith, there's confidence faith, and there's hope faith. And that these 3 elements live in an intensity in truth. That faith is an intensity in truth with a combination of belief, confidence, and hope. That these are sort of come into a ball of intensity. that man creates as a human mage. Man is the human mage creating magic through his faith, combined with divine magic, which is God. So we have God man. So when you are using divine magic, you would invoke the name of Jesus Christ, for instance. That puts you in alignment with God's truth and with divine magic. So when you combine the mages of God and man, God mage and man mage, and if you're in the certainty of truth, that is the faith which can move mountains. So I love, there's a quote on there that's very beautiful. There's a couple quotes here. Faith is the union of thinking, feeling, desiring, of the human being with cosmic being, with God. The union of those thinking, feeling, and desiring elements. Those are the centers of man. Another quote on page 211 is that faith is divine breath in the soul, just as hope is divine light and love is divine fire in the soul. That's a very beautiful quote. I would say that's a standout that I would keep in my cliff notes of my cliff notes. That would be in there of Tomberg's work. Faith is divine breath in the soul, just as hope is divine light and love is divine fire in the soul. Then he goes on to talk about empirical science, that the basis of empirical science is grounded in doubt. The ability that we have to doubt. And that's the father of the scientific method, doubt. Doubting of our past traditions, doubting of the fates or anything which puts us on a path towards some sort of certainty. Doubt steps into that path of what seems to be a destined certainty and breaks off from there and drives it into a new direction of scientific exploration. So the root of all questions, the root of all quests, the root of all research comes from the essence of the doubting in humans, the doubting element of humans, which seems to be pitted against faith, but is not, as we know, because you look at doubting Thomas in the gospel, and he is an archetype. Doubting Thomas is given to us as an archetype of this sort of skeptical man. So faith is the mother of empirical science in the sense that, I've lost my train of thought, but doubt is the father of scientific method and faith is the mother of empirical science. So doubt is a motivating force, doubt is the motivating force, which is kind of a masculine force. It's the father of inquiry, okay? And faith, here you go. Faith as the mother of empirical science. She represents the fructifying element, the fecundity, the fruitfulness that comes from having faith in a path of inquiry, where you have the idea of that you're working with matter, you're working with matter, which is mother. And with mother matter, you are bringing forth, you are fructifying from matter through this motivating force of doubting inquiry. Okay, does that make sense? So those two things, I love dividing them into the principles of masculine and feminine. I think that helps me. The scientific creed is written out on page 212. That's a fascinating thing. It's mapped onto the Nicene Creed of faith, the Christian Nicene Creed. So if you map that out, that's a fascinating thing that he did. He clearly did that himself. He wrote that out himself, so that required some thought. I'm not going to go into that. Let's just leave that aside. I'm going to move on to all the points of scientific method, but they basically are, in summation, they are the multiplicity of the unique single substance, the mother of all forces, the human mind, which is born of the substance of the world, evolution, to which the human mind owes existence, and then through collective and organized effort, the scientific method finds its goals and its fruitfulness. Okay. he talks about the tetragrammaton. The tetragrammaton, again, inverted, is a reflected element. So yod he, vau he, yod he being spirit, he being matter, vau being evolution, and he being individuality. You then invert those to individuality, he, vau evolution, he matter, yielding spirit, yod, okay, or promising. And he says that this reflection of the tetragrammaton is exactly what empirical science can offer. And if you just take it with its by itself, it is only reflected intelligence. It represents the logic of cunning, and is to become like God. So in a sense, it offers a false a false path. Okay, that's what he's saying, because the logos emanates from Yod. The word emanates from Yod. Yod is the crown is the crowning and beginning a priori point of the tetragrammaton. Does that make sense? And so if you start from the bottom, which is empirical science, starting with individuality or matter in the world, and then thinking that out of individuality evolves matter, and then spirit is last. Spirit is at the bottom of your inverted tetragrammaton. So that is upside down. That is upside down. And yet it's offered to us. So the serpent of Genesis, this is what he offered to humanity, which is that your eyes will be opened and you will become like gods, knowing good and evil. And so we unpack that, right? Let's unpack that later. I won't go into that. So I do not want to go there. But you guys understood what that was about if you read that part. Next is, but it's important to bring up that he brings up the horizontal world, which is the world of the serpent, which is quantitative science. And that's what the serpent offers, is a wide horizontal perspective. And it can look really fabulous and huge and amazing. And we can get caught up in quantitative aspect of life, which is all on the horizontal plane. The vertical axis, then he introduces the vertical axis, which is the qualitative plane, the plane of spiritual value, the plane of the world of values and religion. And that these cross and intersect. Okay, they intersect. One is the mechanical world, the horizontal is mechanical, and the sacramental world is the vertical world. Okay, so then he brings up the the serpent of Moses, the bronze serpent, which is cast and crucified onto the cross. The crucifixion of the serpent is critical to the Hermetic method. I'll just leave it there. So transformation of the will to power into the will to serve. Okay, so we'll talk about that, the transformation of metaphysical dogmas into methodological postulates. Okay, so this is, yeah, my head was exploding at this point, but we go on. So erecting the bronze serpent in today's wilderness of horizontal empirical science. Then he goes into the gift. I love, this is my favorite part, the gift of Black perfection, the perfect night. Okay, this is a whole different section where he explores the perfect night. And I think he was inspired by, we can talk about the quote at the beginning of the letter where it talks, and I forget what it is, it's from St. John of the Cross, I don't know, but you know, this does all go back to the mystics when they go into, you know, the dark night or the cloud of unknowing. That's what they call it. The cloud of unknowing. I think this is what we often hear it called. It's the endeavor to draw light from the darkness, from the cloud of unknowing. Okay. I have a wonderful, by the way, I have a wonderful video that I'm going to send to you guys that I just came upon last night. It's a perfect example of, it's a woman named Meredith Beek, and it's called the Pyramid in the Pool. It's a perfect example of thesis and antithesis being synthesized into a new piece of wisdom. And I'm going to send that to you because it's a perfect visual, philosophical. She's using a visual aid to show you the idea of how to melt. And literally, it's a melting. And it's an alchemical process that she presents. And it's intuitive and it's brilliant. And I'm going to send that to you. But I'm not going to take any more time here because I'm taking a lot of time now. I'll send it to you. Consciousness, he breaks consciousness into infrared light, which he calls darkness. And that's the ignorance, that's the darkness of ignorance. That's the darkness of a lazy path. Okay. He's not talking about that when he talks about the darkness, which is the perfect darkness, which is the darkness of ultralight, which is the darkness in which you grope to find higher knowledge. And it takes great endeavor. So there's the antimony there, which he goes into synthesis at the top, mixture at the bottom, compromise in the middle, which is the neutralization on the horizontal plane or on the equator. You saw the really cool model there, his illustration of the North Pole and the South Pole of the two cylinders combined, two cones combined at the base, pointing up and down. Fascinating. We'll go into that. We can explore that. Then he goes back to the symbolism of the Hermit card. And we're getting there. I'm almost done. I promise. The white point of this cone represents the lamp, which is the luminous point of transcendental synthesis. Okay, the white point. This is where all colors are resolved into one, just as an example. The equator is represented by the mantle. The mantle that the hermit wears is the equator. The equator is what the hermit navigates. He is peripatetic. He wanders the equator, which is the entire whole truth. But that's the whole truth, which would be like the patchwork of his mantle, would be like Jacob's coat of many colors. It's an array of qualities that are needed to navigate the equator. And it's quite diverse, okay? And this is where unity and diversity comes in. The staff represents the black point, and the staff represents the support that we have in the darkness for feeling out the way. This is, the deep power of intuition that works into the subconscious, okay, and brings things from the subconscious into the light. So the ninth Arcanum, he brings up here that this Arcanum is, he calls it prudence. So the essay then is to describe prudence. And on page 221, I would like you to note that there's an essay to describe prudence, which I think is worth reading several times. If you can find that on page 221, his essay, it is one of the most beautiful passages in all of the meditations on the Tarot. His description of the hermit representing prudence. I highly recommend it. Go back and read that. Dog ear that page for yourself. It's beautiful, very beautiful. He talks about the solitude of the hermit. The solitude of the hermit is absolutely crucial for the hermit's sense of peace and impartiality as he moves peripatetically through the world. He's the salesman of peace, the traveling salesman of peace. I love that phrase. That's hilarious. But the intoxication of collectivism is not the place where you'll find the hermit. The intoxication, you will not find the hermit going down to a rave, doing the drugs, dancing around with his thumb in his mouth. Okay, that is not where you're going to find, and he's not going to be in an ayahuasca ceremony either. And he's also not going to be at a political protest. Probably not. So he must be sober. The hermit is the soul of sobriety. So sober means that he must be alone, because his pursuit of truth is through synthesis. And synthesis is peace, which implies prudence, and prudence implies solitude. He talks about the subtle joys of solitude. He says, it's not all just, aloneness is not loneliness, by the way. aloneness, the solitude of the hermit is to be distinguished from loneliness. They are not the same thing at all. So he is the traveling salesman of peace. He is the peacemaker. Blessed are the peacemakers. The peace of the hermit is, and he defines this peace, which is unity and diversity, which you have unpacked by reading this. He is the peace of brotherhood and mutual complement. Very beautiful statement. He is the peace. The hermit's ideal is peace, the peace of the neutralizing of the binaries. Okay, the neutralizing of the polarities, the solving of antinomies or opposites to find the rainbow. So it's not a squashing, it's not just a mere pushing together of polarities, it's not merely a neutralization, it is a new synthesis, but it takes in the entire rainbow of diversity. When his will, he works very hard to keep his will awake and strong, which is symbolized by his walking. So this brings us to the fourth or practical antimony, where you thought, oh my God, not another antimony. I don't think I can stand it. This is just too much. Really, the icing on the cake for him is the wisdom will antimony, which he breaks down into three. So wisdom will, universal synthesis, particular action. That's one of them. Knowledge will, knowledge will, knowledge will. Goes on into that. He divides those into contemplative work or inactivity and the work of the will in sheer activity. So uninformed activity is what he would call ignorant activity. It's non-knowing, it's narrow-minded, it's a loss of perspective, it's where you just jump into action, and it's spiritually limiting due to the concentration on effort. You know, you look at like a general in an army, or whatever, or a soldier in an army, and they're just told to act. They're told to act according to orders. They must have a very narrow focus and concentration of effort. So they're not allowed to be broad in their mindedness. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to do their job. So there's a role for that. The contemplative role. There's an enjoyment, he says, in just being contemplating nature, contemplating studies, contemplating things. But we're not talking about inactivity at the expense of the will here. Contemplative action. That's why we find a lot of talk now about contemplative action. Richard Rohr comes to mind. The true contemplative's work is spiritual work, and his or her work is spiritual endeavor, which takes on a great responsibility onto the shoulder of the hermit, because they are responsible for helping to steer the spiritual ship of mankind through the waters of history. And it's practical work, and it involves prayer, divine service, study, and a disciplined life. Okay, we have now in our world, we have the more monasteries we have. The monastery model that I belong to, the monastic model, is a monastery without walls. I belong to the Oriental Orthodox order in the West, very loose affiliation, but it is called a peripatetic order, in the sense that there are no walls. Okay, the monks are monks in the world. So the mystics have come out of their ivory towers in our current day, and the mystics are of the world. There's that Teasdale book, is wonderful, Wayne Teasdale, A Monk in the World. That's a good place to start on that idea. So the hermit metaphor, the biggest hermit metaphor here is that he's walking. So he gets back to the hermit image. The hermit walking represents the head, the heart, and the limbs all working in concert together. When we do Lectio Divina, we say, what is your head here in this reading? What is your heart here in this reading? What do your limbs want to do after understanding this piece of scripture? So that's the model right there of contemplative action. Okay, so it's the cardial awareness. We're all very familiar with this idea of the heart. He has to explain it to us, but we don't need that because we've been immersed in that kind of study for a long time. The heart as the love center, the heart as the human and divine structure of love, the heart as our direct contact with God, and is part of the divine structure within us. It's the central sun, the central center. It's the center of our beingness, is our humanity. And this is why I love the Hermetic path, because the law of the heart is the most central law that he works with here. It's walking steadily without haste. And so it is the humanization of the whole human being through the work of love. So this is page 227. There's another extraordinary passage that I recommend you go and read. It's the practical application. And he goes into the will and the heart of knowledge. Basically, he describes the trinity of knowledge, heart, and will, which is where he's taking this antinomy of wisdom and will. And he's saying that the heart is the solution element, which makes it all dance. And that we must work with feeling for truth, which is intellectual intuition. We must work with feeling for beauty, which is moral warmth. And we must work for the feeling for the good, which is practical intuition. So knowledge, heart, and will are always in a dance, the perichoresis, the dance of the Trinity, that dance of synthesis, which is crucial to the thinking of the Hermetic method. And that is it, folks. How long did I ramble on? Oh my gosh. Long time. But what do you think?
I think you pulled it together beautifully. Thank you. Thank you.
Alice, I'm so grateful for your doing this, because it makes reading this material worthwhile. This is hard, dense material. And for you to start the introduction of this with, this is the heart, that's how you said it. You said, this is the heart of the meditation, and it's dark and dense. And that puts it in a context that makes it worthwhile and encourages me to look at the next letter, because this is hard stuff. So thank you for that, and for bringing your knowledge of your knowledge generally, your training, your collegiate knowledge to this as well, and your life training to it is so, I'm so grateful for that. So thank you.
Well, thank you for listening. This is the heart and center. We're almost at the midpoint of the book. And this is the deep, dark heart. This is the heart of darkness. It's very beautiful, though. I guarantee you there's many rewards to reap. And don't worry about the antinomies. What do you think, John?
Well, I'd like to echo the thanks for what you have just said. There is something I'd like to share, because I'm not sure if this is something that shows I've been approaching it right, or whether it shows that I'm actually going off on a tangent. But I just came from this highly complex letter, a lot of which I did not understand, with a fairly simple image. I mean, one, here we have this hermit with the lamp. He has received from God, and that is important. He's received from God this light which can show him things, and that is absolutely crucial. He's got his staff, which means he's actually making sure he is walking in the right direction, in the right way, and is not tripping over irrelevancies. So he's walking with great humility and care. And he's got this cloak. I don't think Tomberg says this, but I'm sure I've come across somewhere someone saying that the hermit is usually pictured outside a cave, which is in a sense his home if he's got one. And the cloak is rather like a portable cave, in that it shelters the hermit from things that will not help. And what Tomberg says that I found really helpful, it shelters him from simple theoretical intellectual ideas, and actually is making him concentrate on seeing things in the light of God, the light that he is, holding up in his hand. And this means, and this is me, and it might just be rubbish, but for me, this means he can see the whole of life as an arcanum. He simply sees what's in front of him. But then anything can actually start to take a depth. It can be a window through which he sees higher realms and higher realms see him. And then it can also be a door through which he can go into higher realms, and higher realms can come to him. And I just thought, this is where the church has gone wrong. We've done nothing but talking about God. We should actually be be encouraging people to see ordinary life as being an arcanum through which you can glimpse God and through which you can go to the higher realms. And of course, this makes sense about the third force. If we don't treat the world as an arcanum in this way, we basically are stuck in a world of binary conflict, and all we can do is mix irresponsibly or compromise, which doesn't work for very long. But if we can actually see God in the world and the world in God, and keep our eyes and sensitivities open, then there is a chance that we will suddenly find the third way in which God can say, yes, you can both keep your integrity and you can both go together in the light of this third way. So thank you for listening to me to that.
That is John, thank you. That's a beautiful synopsis. And I would like to add to that just something that came to me while you were speaking. I was speaking about the hood of the mantle. You're correct. He has his cave, he has his mantle as his home, as his traveling home, his tent, his hut that he sets up in the wilderness to shelter him. But his head is exposed. Think about this in contrast to the other arcana where there are crowns, tiaras, headdresses. This is the first one without any headdress whatsoever. He is bald-headed. He is completely vulnerable and exposed to the heavenly spheres. There's no canopy, as in the chariot rider. There's no protecting him from those divine rays. He is now completely exposed and vulnerable. He's also completely exposed and vulnerable to the entire world of human intellectual ideas, which can rain down on him and make him quite soaked. And could really, quite penetrate and give him a chill. He's open and vulnerable to that. But he's, as you say, he's become himself in his being a portal between the arcana of the world, the arcana that appears in our world, and the divine arcana that he is representing as a template here. But through his being a portal, he's activating it in the world. But it requires the vulnerability of making his head bare. He has a hood. If he has the hood on, think about it. If you have the hood on, it makes you blind. You don't have good peripheral vision. If you don't, you have to be bareheaded in order to have full range of vision like the eagle. Thank you. Love to hear.
Well, and I really appreciate and then John also coming to this point that this letter is inviting us to create a synthesis. So we have example after example, laborious example after that. And that's the point of the Hermeticist, is to be able to create the synthesis. And we see this in scripture all the time, the paradox of being able to join in and having this guide, this hermit, to join in to be able to create this third way, this synthesis. That's the creative spark that we have.
That's why Jesus teaches us through parables.
Mhm.
Parable means parabola. Parable means paradox. And so what Jesus is trying to do is to get to that synthesis of heart knowledge, which is where you can't wrap your intellect around his story. You have to apply heart understanding to it. Otherwise, it's a cipher. It's a cipher. It's absolutely inscrutable. It's inscrutable unless you, his teachings are inscrutable unless you can apply heart knowledge to, wouldn't you say? And the will to understand.
Mhm.
Thank you. I think this is such a rich one. This is a really rich one. And do you see how it depends on keeping all the previous ideas in mind? The idea of concentration without effort versus concentration with effort, which takes you into action, which is too narrow. See, just that contrast right there. Concentration without effort. That's one of the things I took out of this was, what are the fruits of concentration without effort? And this is where it's going to, this kind of thing. Does anybody see any other building upon the earlier arcana? Are they seeing any patterns?
One point that you made, Alice, about, I love this idea that really got, I think, teased out with John about this hood. You know, he has a hood, but it's not on. And then you referred back to the other ones about having some kind of covering for the head. Now, the lover, however, does not.
That's true.
The lover does not, but then the lover has this direct charge that is coming down with all of this, the light, the substance, the intensity. So that's something I want to think on, because I think it's very specific, what's on the head, the symbolism of covering of the head. Now, one person is the voice of sensuality. That was one who does have the covering on the head. But in this letter 6, the lover, he's about to get shot by love directly on, actually to his shoulder, but being pulled by that. Or are there any other observations that you all have about the covering on the head for the lover? I mean, I just see this strong connection between
We'll
love.
go forward with the Hanged Man. Of course, he's upside down, so he does not have one, and neither does Death not have a covering. Of course, I haven't read these, so I don't know exactly what that means, but I thought that was interesting that those two in particular do not either, and we'll find out why. I mean, what the meaning is.
Yeah, but that's great to be able to really key in on that and concentrate on that, because I do think that's important. So thank you for that introduction, Alice, to that.
We're going to see these leitmotifs. The leitmotif of head covering or lack of covering. Also the leitmotif of how light is presented. So in the lover, it's a blazing sun, and it's depicted in those red and yellow primary rays, and it's directly there, you know, they're directly under that sun. In the hermit, it's a lamp. It's a very small fragment of that light, isn't it? But it is that light because it's represented by a lamp that's red and yellow alternating. It is supposed to represent that same light from source, from the heart, the light of the heart, the divine window, as John puts it, that window.
And red and yellow probably could signify the sun and the moon, light from the sun and the moon.
It could. I haven't noticed whether light from the moon is depicted in the tarot as raying out. It's usually more pulling in. It's usually more reflective. The red and yellow aspect, yeah, I'm not sure. That's a mystery we have to solve. Is there a differentiation of red and yellow aspect of light?
So we do see the crescent of the moon depicted in his mantle.
Do you?
I think so. I believe I saw it there,
Wow, that
kind of on the
in the
back
folds
of
the
his,
mantle?
in the fold of his mantle.
Mm.
Wow, that would be very cool. That's true. I'm gonna look it up.
Direct, sort of just directly behind his head. And
I'm not looking at the colored version of it, by the way, just the black and
it's a
white.
little more apparent in the colored version that I was looking at, but
Where is it in the image?
sort of, let me pull out this colored card here. But I think I see the crescent of the moon in his mantle,
Oh, yeah.
directly behind his head, and then also sort of lower by where his legs would be.
Wow.
But in some of the earlier Arcanum, we see the head covering as being the medium for the light from above, or knowledge to transcend and be sort of digested, and has been referred, some of the tiers or layers of the tiaras or crowns have represented gnosis. And in the synthesis that we see in the Hermit, I wonder if his digestion and synthesis of that knowledge and it moving toward the heart is what allows him to walk without his head being covered. It seems, he also seems like an older character who's just had the advantage of the wisdom of years. I wonder if that has something to do with him no longer needing to have his head covered. I don't know. I appreciated the focus on the antinomy, and I think that we see in the gospel just an invitation to walking this narrow way, and resolving these things that I think in a lot of ways defy reason. And I think that if you lean into that, that you will often find yourself walking alone, has been my experience. I think I, in a lot of ways, have my foot in two worlds. Yet, yeah, I'm painfully extroverted. I have a great sense of community. I think within the church and among people who have found what we would often consider to be success. And I have a great community in a world of folks who have just been wounded and traumatized and marginalized. And something about this reading in the Hermit just really spoke to me in the way that I recognize that though I'm often surrounded by people on sort of these polarized and polemic sectors of society, I'm often walking alone in the little section that he spoke of, finding community among hermits. Just was beautiful to me, because I think that I find that community among some of my coworkers. I think I find that community in this space among you all, and I appreciate you for that, and for being people of peace, which we can sit in this space and consider how do you walk the tightrope through this narrow gate on this way, led by the light of wisdom, yet knowing that we must carry that staff because I don't think we have any idea where it is we're being led or asked to follow. Those are, I guess, those are some of the thoughts that were rising in me as I read through this stuff, and appreciate just this space and for your input. Thank you.
I'm so glad that you can express your introvert side here, Mark, because I would never have thought of you as an extrovert. I would love to see you in your other life where you're just out there, extroverted. It'd be really fun to see that. But we get to see your more contemplative inner workings here. It's wonderful. Thank you.
I like how he ended this chapter on page 229, and he talked about the work of salvation. It's because it's salvation of the soul, which is the restoration of the reign of the heart. So it's the restoration of the reign of the heart. And that to me summarized so much of this hermit, and will be interesting to see how that's going to be the jumping off point for the next letter. Thank you.
The next letter, the Wheel of Fortune, which interestingly he doesn't allude to or mention at all. That's one of the first times I think he doesn't mention the one coming next. No. Maybe even Tomberg himself was exhausted with his own line of thought and had to take a pause kind of midway through this tome of essays. It's just, he unloaded some massive things, and it was all cloaked in other words, the teachings it's themselves were cloaked in such dense darkness here. You had to chisel at the rock on that path outside the cave to get. I mean, that's why you guys, I remember Express last week, you were like, have you started letter 9 yet, the Hermit? Oh my goodness, it was really difficult. And I was like, oh yeah, I hadn't even started it yet. And Michelle laughed. She was like, oh. And then I realized, oh, I better get on it right away. And I'm glad I did give it a little extra time, because this was, you couldn't give short shrift to this one.
That is it. Well, it is 11:15 now. So I guess we ought to wrap this up. I'll go ahead and turn the recording off.
No, not yet. We're not done. 11:15? We're not done.
We are so not done. But
no, we're not. Let's
anyway.
Let's just see if there's a couple people. You guys, anybody want to say how are you feeling about this, Miller?
I just think you've helped with it immensely, Alice. I probably was pretty lost with just reading it. So everything you had to say, and John's input too, has really helped me understand it. I appreciate that. I appreciate that you do that for us, really.
Kian, do you have any thoughts that you want to share at all? You don't have to, but
no, I really enjoyed the letter. I'm a philosophy researcher, so I knew a lot of the philosophies, but this was like joy to my heart, because it was kind of like what was missing when you read like very intellect heady philosophy that seems to be missing something, that he kind of brings in, or that none of these ideas are necessarily wrong, but if they're not animated by the words, they can be corrupted. And I think he was showing the weakness of some of these theories without that. And also one thing I noted was the personal side of it, when he talks about this kind of militant realism, and he mentions the Bolsheviks, and I believe his parents or his mother was killed by communist revolutionaries. So I think it's amazing that he has the wisdom to kind of see the corruption in that idea, but also see how it can be animated by something more powerful. So I like that.
Yes, you put your finger on what has always appealed to me about Tomberg. It's the warmth of the thinking. The warmth, there's a warm light. And to me, the Hermit it epitomizes that with his lamp. It's just knowledge to me. As a philosophy major, I realized I felt like I was in the wrong field after studying that for several years. I felt like I just didn't, it was like squeezing a really dry fruit. There was no juice.
Mhm.
I remember I jumped into a comparative religion class on the Upanishads or Gilgamesh or something like that, one of the epics. And I said, man, I'm in the wrong area. I should be in comparative religion. What have I done? And I was horrified. And then I realized, well, there's a whole lot more for me to figure out, isn't there? Because this heady stuff only is going to take me so far. So thank you for sharing that. And you at your age coming to that realization, whoa, that's very exciting, actually. Honey, what do you think?
I have a construction going on next door, so you probably can't hear me. But the one thing that we weren't able to fit in is on 228. I really liked the mantras, the talking about the 2 petal to the 16 petal lotus. But the mantras, I thought, well, he just pulled it in at the very end with the yoga and the Hindu. So but thank you again. I'll get off because of all the stuff going on here.
Thank you for bringing that up, because he brings up the 7 I ams and corresponds them to the 7 centers of the chakras, which I did not unpack that at all. And I leave that to you to contemplate those and how they correspond. It's pretty clear if you start with the bottom, and I did write next to them in pencil how they correspond to the chakras. So in case you didn't know, I can just quickly tell you that how they that was on 228, wasn't it? How they correspond to. So the very bottom one, the 4-petaled lotus, is the I am the true vine. That is the root chakra. That is the grounding. And you can also map this onto the Kabbalah, the Sephiroth, the tree of life, but we'll just do it here. He's trying to create a synthesis between East and West here. I think he's really trying to create that synthesis. And he, again, I love Tomberg because he's eminently practical. He wants to give you practical exercises. And if you want to go and quote and start, thrumming on yam, ram, vam, I've done it. Okay, hum, it's fun. But you know what? Go contemplate, just go contemplate the 7 I ams. You'll get to the same place. So the 4-petaled lotus is the root. I am the true vine. The 6-petaled lotus, going from bottom to top, is the pelvis. I'm starting from the base. The pelvis, the pelvic section, the sacral chakra, is I am the way, the truth, and the life. Think about that with the womb. That is the way, the truth, and the life coming through the womb incarnated. The solar plexus chakra is the 10-petaled lotus, and that is I am the door. So what is that about? Interesting. Then the 12-petaled lotus above that is the Anahata center. That is the heart center. That is the bread of life. Oh, it's very beautiful. And the 16-petaled lotus is the throat chakra, and that is I am the good shepherd. And so the vision that shows the expression through the throat, which is the shepherd calling to his sheep. That's where I get from that. He's calling his sheep. The throat center has to be active. Then the two-petaled lotus is the ajna center. That's the third eye. And that is the light of the world. And you might say that the hermit's lamp that he's holding represents the light of the world. And it's a separate center. It's a separate center. It's the third eye. It's the synthesizing eye of higher knowledge represented by his lamp. And then the first one is the 8-petaled lotus, which it represents the crown chakra, which on the hermit is open and vulnerable to the skies. Okay, open to the universe. And that is I am the resurrection and the life, corresponding to the 7 I ams. Very beautiful. And he's trying to create a synthesis between the East and the West there. And again, if he's successful or not, it doesn't matter. He makes the effort. That's so admirable. It's so beautiful that he makes that effort. And he tries to create a beautiful correlation, which is trying to reach the good, the true, and the beautiful. So he's literally, with these exercises, showing you in a most direct and tangible way how to use the Hermetic method. It's love it.
Well, I, for one, am going to really enjoy listening to this a second time. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, I will get letter 8 and 9 up forthwith, quickly. I was so involved with reading this one that